Dear brothers and sisters, we know her for her sorrow. She longed for a son, but she was not blessed with children. She had a sacrificing nature. We know her for her faithfulness. If blessed with a child, she promised to the Lord that she would dedicate the child to the Lord. And she stuck to her promise. I think by this time you have guessed who that person is. She is Hannah, mother of Prophet Samuel. Let us meditate on 5 qualities of Hannah which most of us don't know. Let's read 1 Samuel, 1st chapter, 11th verse. 1 Samuel, 1st chapter, 11th verse. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. Hannah is one remarkable woman in the Bible. Most of us remember her story of sorrow of not being a mother. The name Hannah instantly reminds us of her sorrowful prayer at the temple. We also remember that she did an extraordinary thing of promising to dedicate the child to the Lord for his whole life, and she stuck to her promise. Tell me, which mother can do what Hannah did? Leaving her little child at the temple to be raised by Eli the priest. Here are 5 things you may not know about Hannah in the Bible. First thing is, Hannah knew how to respond and when to respond with grace. She also knew when not to respond. Hannah showed matchless restraint with her words. She not only knew the right things to do, but also knew when to do those things. She knew when to say the right things and when not to say anything. Elkanah's other wife, Peninnah, often ridiculed Hannah for her infertility. Yet, instead of retorting to her tormentor, she kept her mouth shut. During one of the family's annual trips to the tabernacle, when Peninnah ridiculed Hannah, she did not retort. Instead, she left the dinner table and went straight to God with her plea. In the temple, when Eli the high priest saw only Hannah's lips moving and misunderstood that she was intoxicated and rebuked her, she responded with grace to Eli also. She demonstrated her humility through her words. Let us read 1 Samuel 1st chapter 16th verse. 1 Samuel 1st chapter 16th verse. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. She did not retort to Peninnah at the dinner table, and she acknowledged Eli's position of authority at the temple by describing herself as his servant, even though she could have easily retorted to him. She chose to respond with due respect to Eli. The second thing we can learn from Hannah is Eli the priest asked God to bless Hannah with a child more than once. Eli the priest asked God to bless Hannah with a child more than once. After Hannah expressed herself to Eli, he reassured her of God's intention to answer her prayers. But that was not the last time Eli went to God on Hannah's behalf. We know that God answered Hannah's prayer and she conceived. The story doesn't end with Samuel's birth. It did not end when she took Samuel to the temple. Every year, Eli used to bless Elkanah and Hannah, asking God to give them more children because of her sacrifice. Let us read 1 Samuel 2nd chapter 20th verse. 1 Samuel 2nd chapter 20th verse. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, "May the Lord give you children by this woman to take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord." Then they would go home. Thirdly, Hannah had 5 more children after Samuel. Hannah had 5 more children after Samuel. God continued to answer Eli's prayers for Hannah. She had 3 more sons and 2 more daughters while Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. Let us read 1 Samuel 2nd chapter 21st verse. 1 Samuel 2nd chapter 21st verse. And the Lord was gracious to Hannah. She gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. Another interesting thing which we can observe is that Hannah was not the first woman in the Bible to suffer from infertility. She was the 4th woman in the Bible to suffer from infertility. 3 other women before Hannah endured the anguish of not being able to conceive. Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel also suffered from infertility. While Hannah accepted God's promise with steadfast faith, The other three did not. Let us look at the other three women. Let us read Genesis 18th chapter 12th verse. Genesis 18th chapter 12th verse. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? What was Sarah's response when the angel proclaimed that the Lord would give her a child? She laughed. Let us read Genesis 25:22. Genesis 25:22, and know Rebekah's response when her twins jostled in her womb. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. Let us turn to Genesis 31. Genesis 30th chapter 1st verse. This verse shows us Rachel's attitude when she was unable to conceive. She gave the responsibility to her husband. Let's read this verse. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." We find Sarah laughing at what the angel said, Rebekah being unhappy with the twins in her womb, and Rachel blaming Jacob for her infertility. But Hannah had steadfast faith in God. Her reverent fear of the Lord was just one more virtue of her godly character. And lastly, the fifth point I want to meditate upon, Hannah's famous prayer may have prophesied the coming Messiah. Hannah fulfilled her promise to the Lord by dedicating Samuel to the Lord. It definitely was really hard as a mom. If I were in her place, I wonder whether I would have stuck to my promise or not. But Hannah praised God for her blessing and fulfilled her commitment. She thanked him for his sovereignty. We find evidence of God's plan for the salvation at the end of her prayer. Let us read 1 Samuel 2nd chapter 10th verse. 1 Samuel 2nd chapter 10th verse. Those who oppose the Lord will be broken. The Most High will thunder from heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. These 5 virtues of Hannah tell us that she was a really humble, faithful, and passionate person. By looking at these virtues, we understand her trials and rejoice in her victories. Just like Hannah, we too can respond with grace. We can seek God at all times and circumstances just like her. Just like her, we can trust God and not look back. Be confident that God will answer our prayers and to fulfill our commitment to God. God bless you.